Jesus Christ, our risen and glorious Savior, we praise you for sending out your apostles and the believers to share the gospel in the entire world and for allowing them to bring the gospel to many places. Even Thomas, as tradition says, going to India, bringing the gospel to Asia. This late date, so close to your return, as far as we can tell, that we are back in Asia, and we are even in the country of communist Vietnam. Thank you for this opportunity. Continue to bless and prosper the message of the gospel we proclaim there as you reach every soul of your elect before your return. Amen. Okay. There we go. And my first thing, you know I love coffee, and I even brought my own because I'm an absolute coffee snob, and I cannot drink church coffee, I'm sorry. I mean, I've tried it here at Holy Trinity. It's church coffee. It's not good. So people know that, and they said, oh, you're going to love Vietnam. You're going to love the coffee there. So I went anticipating great coffee like you have in the Northwest here, and I didn't find it. I usually order black coffee. That's, if you're a purist, you just drink black coffee. It's a sin to add cream or sugar. Sorry, I forgive you. And it's almost all espresso. So I go to these stands and I order an Americano, and something is just off a little bit. And here's what I discovered is that it's the wrong coffee. If I can get to, there we go. Oops. Yeah. If you know good coffee, it's Arabica. The bad coffee is Robusta. And I discovered that Vietnam is the second largest producer in the world of Robusta coffee beans. Number one is Brazil. And this is the coffee the industry developed to grow at low elevation in full sunlight without all the care that the good coffee needs. And it has high caffeine content, and most of the world drinks Robusta, but I don't. I spit it out of my mouth, like Jesus with the lukewarm church. And so that's what I was tasting. I was tasting Robusta, and I had to investigate on my trips to Hanoi, and I found a good coffee place, 2 of them, where they use Arabica beans. Even Vietnam is a small Arabica industry, and I'm so happy now. Because otherwise, I bring my own coffee. I have a hand-crank burr mill. I have a silicone water pot that can plug in 220 or 110, and my indestructible metal French press. So I can make coffee anywhere in the world, my own coffee that I bring with me. But I'm disappointed in Vietnamese coffee. What they do with it and why people like it is it's a little bit of strong Robusta with sweetened condensed milk and sugar. Ugh. Would you say with me, ugh, that's not good coffee. Just please don't drink that, and don't spend $5 at Starbucks on it. Yeah.
If it looks like coffee, smells like coffee, tastes like coffee, it ain't our coffee.
Okay. Anyway, that's my introduction to it. My introduction to myself is I'm one of those few called workers in our district as a native to this district. Pastor Wilcox in Tacoma, Joe Johnson down in Portland, and myself, we were all born here. My dad served at Faith Tacoma, and I was baptized there. That's a beautiful, don't smell Tacoma, but look at it with Mount Rainier, and you might appreciate the city of Tacoma. And my dad came out here from the seminary, his first parish call, and during his time there, they built the building that they still have today, and they started the school. And then he took a call to Milwaukee, so there's the building. And of course, we were still Wisconsin people, so my brother has the Braves hat. You know, the one and only World Series championship in Milwaukee is the Braves beat the Yankees. That's a great moment. But we enjoyed the Northwest, and then I grew up in Milwaukee, and when I moved back out here, it's 35 years ago, yeah. People told me I had an accent. I said, I don't have an accent. And it took me years before I went back to Wisconsin and realized Wisconsin people have an accent. And I had it myself. So it did identify me as a Midwesterner. And we, like most families in the 60s, you know, we had 8 kids, so 5 boys, 3 girls, and a station wagon, a Ford Galaxy, and we went all over without seat belts usually, just playing in the back, and took all kinds of fun trips. So that's our family growing up. And my sister and I are there at Wilson Park on the south side of Milwaukee, and I'm giving her a drink on the bubbler, because that's what you call it there. Then my dad took a call to La Crosse, and I went through last year's grade school there and was confirmed at First Lutheran, one of those beautiful buildings they'll never build again, which is a shame, but early 20th century building with stained glass windows, and those are nice. And that was a wonderful place. I never wanted to leave there, but my dad took a call to the seminary, and then we moved to this boring place called Mequon, Wisconsin. It's isolated from everybody. But that's where it happened. And one nice thing, I love winter sports, and our seminary professorage was on top of the seminary hill, and I could go, we had a toboggan, and I'd go sledding down, build a ramp onto the pond, and then the pond we shoveled off and went ice skating. It was a winter wonderland. And I graduated from Kettle Moraine Lutheran High School in 1978, which was the first class to go all 4 years at that school. Now it is just an amazing school that I wouldn't even recognize the campus. And then reluctantly, I didn't want to be a pastor, but I did become one, and I still wonder if I should have. But anyway, followed the path of my grandfather, who went there 100 years ago, and then my dad, and then I went after that. And if you ever meet a Pastor Nitz in the WELS, we're all related, and some other ones too. So out of the seminary, and after a couple years, I taught at a couple of WELS high schools in Wisconsin, and then I was still under the assignment committee and came to start the Mission Exploratory in Olympia, which became Messiah Lutheran. And we had a lot of fun, did a lot of things. I was there for 32 years. But I put one picture there. My favorite thing was soccer camp, because we reached a lot of families we never reached on Sunday morning coming through the door, because it just seemed to meet a need. And it's kind of a regret I have that I couldn't stay there and just follow up on the soccer camp families. But after that, I accepted this call. And the Lord has blessed me with a wife, my wife Catherine, and our 5 children. Our oldest in the left corner, there's Ivor, who some of you might know, because all our kids went to Evergreen, so you might know him. He's married to Mackenzie, and they have a daughter, Isla, and he's a firefighter in Lacey, but he's also in the Washington National Guard, and right now is getting some training in San Antonio. And then over to the right we're in Denver there, where my son-in-law, Conifer Bird, served his vicar year. He married our daughter, Ruth, and they now have a child, Emmanuel, and he's the missionary to London. There's 2 of them, Mike Hartman and Conifer, and they just got their visas, and they might head out this week to live and work in our London mission. And right in the middle is our daughter, Irena, who's a bank manager in Olympia, and to her right is our daughter, Faith, who's about to graduate from University of Washington. And then our last one, the tall one there, is Talitha, who's a senior at Evergreen, will graduate this year. And so, yeah, they're heading off to London. That's Ruth and Conifer. And there's the grandkids. You can see the contrast in families. On the left is our granddaughter, Isla, who's at a monster truck show in Texas. And on the right is the pious Emmanuel, son of a pastor, who's ready for worship. So we'll see how they turn out. And then I accepted the call during the COVID time. It was like a month later is when Governor Inslee shut everything down, and we all kept crying, "Pharaoh, let our people go." But, you know, it took 3 years. And that affected all our plans for going over to Vietnam too. So I've traveled there, but we don't live there yet. There's a lot of complications to that. But anyway, we did have a Taste of Missions. It was totally online. Just a few people attended, and I got my commissioning the same time as Paul Borman, who serves the new mission restart in Tigard. in Hope Lutheran. That was, years ago, was Gethsemane Lutheran, and they kind of dwindled down. They sold their property there, and they're putting that proceeds into a restart in Tigard. So that's Paul Borman there. And then that was my second trip to Vietnam, when all the COVID restrictions were lifted and we could actually go out a little bit in Hanoi. And the Hmong guys, they love the WELS. So I sent an email to WELS and said, can you give me any bling WELS stuff? And they found these treasured t-shirts for a park that has a new name. So you can't use WELS Night at Miller Park anymore because it's American Family Field. So why not? And you would never, if you're in the WELS, you would never get rid of anything. So they had these boxes and boxes of t-shirts that they planned to give out for years to come. And we got some of them and got us all posed there in Hanoi with Professor Wardell from the seminary was with me on that trip. You know, if you work in another culture, I mean, even Seattle, that's another culture too. You have to understand your culture to reach people. And it's especially awkward when we come from our traditional culture into a completely unfamiliar one. So one thing I very much enjoy with the Hmong guys is they like to laugh. They like to have a lot of fun. So my last trip there, we all had to squeeze into a taxi, and there wasn't enough room. But Pastor Zong was willing to sit on the lap of Pastor Laura, and they laughed the whole way back from outside the city back to our hotel. And they do have a very good sense of humor, and it's fun, really fun to work with them. We often stay at this hotel, which is in a Japanese part of Hanoi, and in my opinion, in Asia, there's nothing better than Japan. I mean, they make the best cars, they make the best electronics, they just know how to do things right. So that's really a top-notch hotel there. And we've gotten to know the staff a little bit. So this last time I came back, this is leading to a cultural understanding, and the hostess at the hotel said, "Oh, welcome back. You look fat. Have you gained weight?" And I'm thinking, what do you mean? I was trying to hide it a little better and suck my gut in. And so you wouldn't go to the hotels around here and they'd check you in and say, "You look fat. Have you gained?" No. But in a culture where you don't always get enough to eat, if you look fat, you're doing well. If you've gained weight, you're more successful than other people. You know, that's why there's a fat Buddha, because that's what you want to be if you can. You got layers of fat to last through the famine. So it actually was not an insult, it was a compliment, and I had to bite my tongue and remember I'm in a different culture. So there it is, the Kegon restaurant. Oh, I could give so many other stories, but I won't unless there's time at the end. So our mission to the Hmong in Vietnam includes our entrance into a world of Hmong traditional beliefs. We work with this group that's first, some second-generation Christians, but many of them, came out of pagan beliefs into Christianity, and the Hmong pagan beliefs have a very elaborate understanding of the spirit world, as in many pagan cultures. Kind of the default setting for Satan is where he can take away the gospel from people. He puts spiritism in its place. And that means you believe that spirits inhabit almost everything. The trees, the rocks, the water, and your ancestors. They're hovering around, and you live in the balance of this world where you want good spirits to surround you and evil spirits to flee. And the way it developed in the Hmong culture is they believe that each person has multiple souls. And when something bad happens, it means an evil spirit has taken one of the souls out of your body. And if it's one of the more important souls, of maybe 13 of them, you're in a world of hurt, and you're going to need help to navigate the spirit world and retrieve the lost soul. And that's where, in ordinary circumstances, you could use herbal remedies or various incantations and maybe heal yourself in that way, but you might need to go beyond that into shamanism. I'll get back to that later. First, about the Hmong people is, I think most of us have probably heard that term, the Hmong people. They are an ethnic Asian minority throughout Asia. They originate from China, where they once had a kingdom. They had also had a kingdom in Vietnam at one time. So the story of the Hmong is that they're very good fighters, and at times they have conquered territory and had their own kingdoms, but eventually they've lost, and then they get scattered, and so they have scattered. The largest group is still in China, but not where they had their kingdom. Now they're in southern China, but also in Burma, in Thailand, in Vietnam, United States, and Laos is kind of their homeland. It's where a lot of them settled and eventually had property. And if you have, most Hmong have a connection back to Laos, including my partner, Bonkeo Lor. So the connection many people might know in this group here is that the Hmong served as allies of the United States in the conflict in Southeast Asia against the communists. First, the secret war in Laos that you weren't supposed to know about, but the CIA recruited and trained Hmong leaders to fight the Pathet Lao communists. And sad to say, they didn't win. So that country is still under the darkness of communism. One of my trips, I got to Laos. It's a pretty place to visit, but it's kind of, they haven't modernized the economy like China is and Vietnam's doing now. So the streets are dead, there are very few cars, there's a lot of shops that aren't open, and you just feel this oppression of traditional communism is where everything stops. And it's the worship of the state, but the state really doesn't produce very much. The other connection came in the Vietnam War, and I saw Steph nodding his head because a lot of Vietnam veterans knew the Hmong or worked with them, and many of them had special duties. Now, they traditionally had flintlock rifles and bows and arrows and spears, but we trained them in modern arms, and they excelled at it. I mean, they were good, and they know the terrain. And just to give one example, I work with Bonkeo Lor, who's a Hmong pastor from Kansas City, and his father trained, with help from our government, all the people of his village to rescue downed pilots. And I don't know how many they saved, but that was his role. So they helped us, and Saigon fell in 1975, so we didn't win that conflict. And that meant for a lot of the Hmong, they became the enemy of the state and persecuted or killed or driven out. And if they could escape to Thailand, generally that provided the most protection. And sometimes they were escaping through Laos, and they would cross the Mekong River. That has a lot of significance for them. So many of them have crossed the Mekong River into Thailand, and some with bullets flying over the head, and they were killed or they were drowned, or the boat they were in capsized, and the ones that did make it got to a refugee camp, and then some of them left Thailand, many stayed, and came to other places, including the ones that you may have connected with in the United States. And if you say, have I ever met a Hmong person? Well, I'd say, have you ever walked past the flower stand in the Pike Place Market? If so, you have met the Hmong. Those are Hmong farmers. If you look at the names, they're Hmong names. And if you learn how to say hello in Aojong, then you could greet them, and they'd be really excited because you just greeted them. Hmong are very good farmers. So wherever you have a farmer's market, if you see Hmong produce or flowers, just skip everything else and just go there. That will be the best stuff you can get, because in their traditions, they really excel at that. Okay, I was talking about the Spiritism, and it's a religion of fear that Satan has used in so many cultures in Africa and Asia and other, really Native America, same thing, where you never know what's going to happen to you, and when bad things happen, you assume that an evil spirit came against you, maybe your enemy sent it, and you have various remedies to take care of that. And in the Hmong culture, the remedy often to the terrible gods that they have involves the intercession of a shaman. Now, the shaman can be man or woman, and at some point in their life, they feel like an extra spiritual power came upon them, and often it's if they have a physical or mental defect, that's considered spiritual power. So if they have epilepsy or they're mentally ill, that could qualify them for shamanism. And the belief is that when you bring the shaman in, he can enter the spirit realm, and this often involves the sacrifice of an animal. A small problem, a chicken; a big problem, a pig; or a huge problem, a cow. And in the death of the animal, which also has a spirit, the shaman is kind of traveling on that spiritual plane and they like to give the animals a slow death because it gives more time for the shaman to travel, which is cruel to the animal, but essential to their understanding. And once he enters the spirit realm, this could take hours or days, then he is searching for the lost soul, which some evil spirit has captured, and by a trickery, usually, not mastery, not power over the spirits, but just tricking them, he can retrieve it and try to escape from the spirit realm back into the physical realm and restore the soul and bring health to the body. That's the whole concept. So traditionally, the Hmong did not practice any Western medicine. They didn't go to a doctor or a hospital because every problem is spiritual. It's not physical. You have cancer, you'd go to Fred Hutchinson or whatever to get it treated. They would go to a shaman and say, what evil spirit has caused that tumor in my body? If you get rid of the evil spirit, it will heal me. Which is not going to work, but that's how the thinking goes. And it also involves a cycle of reincarnation, like Hinduism, but different. And this reincarnation never has an end. The best hope the Hmong had, I just learned this in my last trip, is to go to hell and meet your great-grandparents. That's your highest joy. There's no concept of heaven. But if you can pass through the realms of the dead in reincarnation and eventually get to hell, and presumably you don't often meet your great-grandparents with a short life expectancy in that culture, and you get to meet them, and this whole connection. What an awful thing compared to the joy that Jesus gives us. A lot of superstitions, like you would not say that that's a beautiful baby. By saying it's a beautiful baby, you curse the child because the evil spirits are listening and they're kind of dumb. So if you identify the beauty, they will seek to take a soul out of that child. But if you say the child is ugly, the spirit will go on to something else. That's the thought process here. And also to protect them, this is same in many other cultures. There's a string that's tied around the wrist or some kind of necklace that's supposed to have spiritual power against those evil spirits. And then again, the shaman, you may go back to them. Another tradition says that if you point at the moon when you see a full moon, the moon will retaliate and cut your ear. And one of my Hmong language teachers from Minnesota that was online said that actually happened to her. Now, her life was a sad story because she was a Christian and then she went back to the Hmong beliefs. And she had pointed at the moon and the next day there was a cut here. Now, how did that happen? You could have a natural explanation, you could have a demonic explanation, but anything that reinforces these false ideas, Satan will certainly use them and use his power. The Hmong did not have a written language until the 1950s when a Jesuit priest developed the alphabet for them. So they told their stories like many Native Americans had pictures on their teepees. They have the story cloth, the pandao, and this one has the Mekong River in it because that's so significant to much of their history, is crossing the Mekong to safety. Traditionally, the Hmong have 18 clans that go back to China, and your last name identifies you as that clan. So I work with Bonkeo Lor, the Lor clan. At the Pike Place Market, there's a Lor family. So first time I took a picture and sent it to Bonkeo, he said, "Oh, that's my uncle." And I don't think he's ever met the person. But if you're part of that clan and someone's older than you, you assume that's either an older brother, an uncle, or an aunt, or whatever, and you're all connected in some way. You're all part of that family, and you kind of look out for each other within the clan, but it also creates clan conflict, because then you might not like the other clan, because 300 years ago, someone in that clan did something to curse your clan, and you're never going to let go of that. So that's the way it works. But how they mix the clans is really interesting, because in marriage practice, it's forbidden to marry someone in your own clan. They have arranged marriages, and so the bride must also always, although it's breaking down a little bit today, but she must always marry into a different clan. And yet she likely, like my language teacher, would retain her original clan name and hyphenate it so everyone will know my dad comes from this clan, but I'm now in this clan, and that is my history. So that's an interesting part of the whole tradition. They do have a tradition of kidnapping women for marriage. Sometimes it's a real thing. They actually kidnap this person in traditional culture. And sometimes it's just a custom to fool the evil spirits. And so like in the United States, when this has happened in California, people call the authorities and they come in to arrest them because they think a kidnapping is happening, and then they have to explain the cultural significance of the moment and such. So here we have, I think these are gals in Minnesota, because the largest number of Hmong in the United States live in California, but the largest concentration is in the Twin Cities. And at festivals and such, they'll wear a traditional outfit, which connects them to their clan and their identity. They have elaborate rituals at the time of death, because this belief in spiritism means that when the spirit of your relative enters the realm of the dead, you must have a successful journey or they will come back to curse you. And part of the successful journey means a traditional instrument called the keng, which is a bamboo flute-like instrument. They believe that the notes do not play music but words, and the mysterious words are guiding the soul, which is, after death, it just kind of hovers in the area. In fact, some of them, to guarantee that the soul stays close to the home, the traditional Hmong home, they will hang the corpse up on the main post of the house until 10 days or 2 weeks later, everybody can gather for the funeral and guarantee a good travel. So you have a rotting corpse in your house because your beliefs tell you, if I don't do that, my father may come to curse me. And if the journey proves successful, then the soul will go back to the birthplace, which would be in a traditional Hmong home where the mother after birth buried the placenta underneath the home. And it's a re-entering, like a rebirth, and you hope that in the new birth, you enter a better form than the one you came out, and there's kind of a concept like karma involved in there. It's very elaborate, but at the same time, it's not different from what Satan does in a lot of world cultures. So I mentioned I've taken some language courses. Because of COVID, it all happened online, which is not the right way to learn a language. You should sit in a room with your teacher and watch her lips and listen carefully. So I struggled with that. Plus, once we got going with the teaching, I just lost the time to do any concentrated study. But it's a difficult language to learn Hmong. They have a tonal language, which means they have 8 tones. Someone had told me that's the most complex tonal language in the world. And so one word said 8 different ways means 8 different things, like pa, ba, pa, ba, ba. I didn't even get them all, but I'm saying pa, but those are all different things. So it's very difficult to listen to. I have to figure out anything, I have to kind of know the context, because something sounds so similar, and I might figure it out from the context, or I might just get confused. So I say a lot of things incorrectly. Of course, I'm just learning. But, I'm learning, I'm trying to use it and get better at it. Now, usually they're so polite and so they honor their elders, and I'm the old guy in the group. that they won't correct me, but Bonkeo will, because he's my partner. So this last trip, we first went to Thailand for a meeting of our One Asia team, and then we went to Vietnam. And Bonkeo went ahead before I did, and he left a shirt at the hotel in Chiang Mai. So he said, could you go by and get the shirt? I said, no problem. And we walked, I was with my brother, and we had a nice walk through the city, and I found a shirt. They had it saved there. So I took a picture of it, and I sent him a text. Gu mua cha, because I was trying to go from memory. I have your Gu mua ka sha. I have your shirt. And then we went on, and I was thinking later, did I put the right tone marker on that? And I wasn't sure, so I went back and checked my Hmong dictionary, and I had said, I have your wife, instead of I have your shirt. But it was the difference of cha and cha. And so I'm learning, you know. But I can teach you at least to say hello. And every culture in the world, they appreciate, if you go to the Mexican restaurant here and say, buenos dias, you know, they're just thrilled that, and gracias, you say anything in their language. So hello is nya zhong. It's spelled N-Y-O-B, and the B is a tone marker, and the double vowel is an ong sound with no tone marker, which is flat. So nya is a rising tone, and then zhong, nya zhong. And at least I can say that when I meet my students online, and I'll say na zhong. And I might say na zhong shao tao, which is good morning, and things like that. So that's my exploration into that. Now, how did Christianity get to the Hmong who have this tradition of spiritism, where the devil certainly wanted to trap them and keep them in the false doctrine so that they would not enjoy the grace of Jesus Christ? Well, it came through missionaries. That's how it often happens. Some of them actually did travel there, but it's a communist country, so you can't do that legally. And others did it through the radio airwaves. I don't know if anybody remembers when the WELS had a German radio broadcast into the Soviet Union, when what was that part of the Soviet Union where all the Germans went? And it was called Heute ist der Tag, and probably until the fall of the Soviet Union, the WELS was broadcasting German services to that part of Russia that had Germans. So radio programs did that. This one was in the Philippines, and they broadcast in the Hmong language, sponsored by the Christian Missionary Alliance Church. And when people tuned in the radio, they usually heard Vietnamese, and then they heard Hmong. It's like, what a thrill. This is our language, and he's telling us about this Jesus guy. They had no idea who he was, but they had a long tradition of a returning king, that a great Hmong king would come from heaven. They call it the mandate of heaven, and he will cause the Hmong people to rise up and conquer their enemies and once again enjoy a glorious kingdom on earth. And there's many movements in Hmong history where people have claimed the mantle of Messiah and have taken up arms, and then ultimately they fail. But they thought maybe Jesus is the right guy. He's the real deal. He's our true Hmong leader to bring the mandate of heaven. So that kind of attracted them, and the language attracted them, and they gathered around the radio, and they get kind of a elementary understanding of Christianity, but without the Bible or without much further information. But I have discovered that all the people we work with are at least bilingual. Some are trilingual or quadrilingual, that they can speak Vietnamese and Hmong and a tribal language, and if they're in the tourism industry, English, and maybe French. So they're very gifted in that way, and they could find a Vietnamese Bible. And they're studying it, they're trying to learn more, and then God blesses that through His Word so that they can mature in the faith, but they still have a lot of questions, and it does help to have someone guide you through the Scriptures when you have questions, so you can understand it. Although, you know, the Holy Spirit can convert anyone without anybody else helping, just reading the Scriptures. So they had a confused form of Christianity, and they're always looking for help to understand, oh, Jesus is my Savior, but exactly how did He save me? Is it by grace, or is it because I've done some works for Him and it became a mixture of grace and works. And in this mix comes, various guys who claim that they know one thing or another, and they come into the church and they start teaching the rules, because it's always easier to grasp a religion of rules than a religion of grace. And if you say, well, you can't drink, you can't smoke, and you have to wear white on Thursday, I can understand that. It's just like the Mormon word of wisdom. No hot drinks, no strong drinks, no tobacco. There's basically 3 rules in the Mormon church, and that's all you have to follow if you want to get into the celestial kingdom. So make it simple, and it's like people are relieved. Oh, that's all there is to it. I just followed these rules, but it's not the truth of the gospel. And ultimately, in any form of legalism, you become frustrated and angry. And when you come to church, the pastor is just telling you you're a sinner and you better try better, or Jesus won't love you. And the devil has won another victory there. So they were in the midst of that kind of progress where the churches are growing and they're Christians and they have the word. They even have a kind of a hymnal that they're using, but they don't have a clear idea of Bible teaching. They have a very traditional society where the elders are respected, and this is one of them. He is the head of the church body, Pastor Ha, and very traditional male-female roles. For example, in the congregations are segregated, as were WELS churches long ago. Men, women sit in different places. That's part of our history too. And they were looking for direction. Who can guide us in the proper way and lead us to a real understanding of what the Bible teaches? And the 5 Hmong leaders got together and they authorized, especially this guy, Pastor Zong, well, would you lead the search? And he went online. Now, this is a wonderful thing that we've experienced in the last 30 years is phone technology. You don't need an infrastructure of poles and wires. You just need cell phone towers, and people that don't even have electricity can have a solar panel that charges their phone, and they're on the World Wide Web. And once you're there, you can find anything. So he went searching and found a Hmong pastor preaching from the United States, and he could understand in Hmong, and that was Pastor Bonkeo Lor, my partner, from Kansas City. Now, how did Boone come to know the gospel? He, along the way, came through Christian Missionary Alliance, but someone brought him into the WELS, and then in the WELS, he and 3 of his brothers all received training through our Pastoral Studies Institute and all became WELS pastors. Now, he put this message online on their website, but he committed the grave sin of most churches, which is not updating your content and not paying your web fee. So he'd actually forgotten about it and didn't keep things updated, but it was still there for Pastor Zong to access, and the contact information that he eventually, through a friend, got in contact with this man. That's my partner, Bonkeo Lor. And the sermon he heard explained the grace of God that he had never heard in his life, even though he'd been a Christian. He'd never heard it explained that it's not by your works, but all by the grace of God through Jesus Christ. And it was just a thrill for him to hear that, and he wanted more, and he contacted Bonkeo. Bonkeo asked his church in Kansas City, would you give me a little leave of absence so I can go over to Vietnam and meet these people? That was 10 years ago. And they did. They were very kind. They supported him. No one else did. This was not a WELS effort yet. And he went on his own dime and recruited some other people to help, and they started instructing them in a rental church in Hanoi in the doctrines of the grace of God. And eventually that reached a point a few years after that where the word got out that we're doing something great here, and the seminary said, could we get involved with our Pastoral Studies Institute? Sounds like an ideal situation for us to help your training of these Hmong leaders. And that's where the seminary's program, if you don't know about that program, back when we went to the sem, they didn't have it, okay? But later on, they decided that not every candidate for the pastoral ministry needs to go to Mequon. If a person already serves in a culture in California or Arizona or Florida, just leave them there with their work and send people to train them. That's the concept of the Pastoral Studies Institute. And that subsequently has grown a lot. That's a big area of WELS ministry now and a part of our seminary. So they got involved in that. They're very well organized, really good. Here's the curriculum that's going to guide them. And for the last 10 years, they've been working through that curriculum, and they just finished. I taught one of the last classes last month on the small call articles of Martin Luther. And this summer, that first group will graduate of 57 students. And we've already started the next group of 60, and we have a third group of 60. Why 60? Well, the church vets these people. They have 1,400 church leaders, but they determine who are the best candidates to have the training right now, and then the facilities we have are kind of limited to 60 people. So that's the whole idea. There's nothing sacred in that number. But it goes on, and you probably know the rest, or part of the rest of the story is that eventually we started working with this government agent, and he suggested the WELS come to Hanoi, build a center there to do all this training instead of going up north to where the Hmong lived or renting a facility. And I was not involved at that time, but that's the direction everything went after that point. You remember all the posters and all the fundraising and the WELS, amazing, WELS members very generously sent $2 million or so in missions money, and that went to this, and I'll give you an update on that. But in the meantime, waiting for that structure to go up, the training continued here. That's Professor Sorum from Pastoral Studies Institute. He's about 3 times the size of a Hmong guy. The Hmong are about the size of a hobbit, and the rest of us, if you're just an average American male, you're taller than everybody over there in that culture. And they love to, everything important happens over a meal. Maybe you know that from Asian culture. If you're going to make a decision or do something, you meet at a restaurant, or the wife cooks the meal in your home. And as you're enjoying this fellowship of a meal, then you talk over things. So we do, and I love Asian foods. That's a good thing. And I've had a lot of exotic things. Just briefly, the most exotic, because you might ask me that, is chicken, fallopian tube, and testicle, which I ate it, and then I learned what it was. And I may not ever eat it again, but I did eat it. And this is a very common type of structure they have for their congregations, which are up in the mountains in the north. And they fund this. The WELS has not funded any of these church buildings. They're doing that on their own. The training continues. That was the rental building. And some of the effect of the training. Here's one of our leaders who will graduate this summer. And after our training, he said, "I have learned to show compassion to the sinner. I have learned to show Christ to the sinner." And that pastor, I know him by the name Hua Ba, and he admits before he understood the grace of God, people would come to church and just harangue them because they'd failed again, they'd sinned again, and he was miserable and they were miserable. There was no joy of the gospel. But then he came to understand that we're all sinners and we need the grace of God, and that's what you proclaim to your people through the law and the gospel. And this is Pastor Ha, the leader, is that respect is a big thing in Asian culture. And he says, people respect me even more than when I laid down the law. Well, they had to respect me. But now that I preach the gospel, they respect and love me as a messenger of the gospel. So that work continues, and their congregations meet every Sunday. The leaders came to the Synod building. I did talk to Pastor Schrader here a bit, and his brothers, Mark Schrader, our Synod president, and he will go to Vietnam this summer to help us dedicate and graduate this the building and this first group. Also, in the April Forward in Christ, he has a little paragraph about the Vietnam mission. And if you subscribe to the WELS Together news, that his next episode is going to be about Vietnam. That's what it looks like in Hanoi. It's a really bustling city. That was the first property we had. And it ended up, we had to sell that and buy a different property. That's a whole complicated story. But a really good thing is we intend to train them so they can train others. And we have our first 9 teaching assistants. So that I'm teaching right now a Bible background course on the Old Testament. Unfortunately, it meets from midnight to 2 in the morning, so it's the afternoon in Vietnam. And the teaching assistants are there with me. They organize the group. They have a prayer and a devotion. And if there's questions and other things, this is on Zoom. They're guiding all of that. And eventually, the whole plan is that they will teach the courses after a period of time. And I don't know if I'll be even involved at that point, but that's the idea. And my call was 3 years ago, and I'll just skip quickly through this. You know the whole COVID mess, and it was very complicated. We couldn't travel, and when we did travel there, one of my trips, I had to put on this full like hazmat suit and double mask and a shield, and they sprayed me with some chemical, and it was just miserable. And then I was in a quarantine hotel for 2 weeks, and I'm glad that's over. But we had these building plans. In September, Sean Young and Stefan Felgenauer from the WELS business office, they went with me and we inspected it to see that it was going along well. And it was, even though you'll see some things that you wouldn't see here, like your concrete is curing and it's held up with bamboo poles. I don't know that OSHA would approve that over here, but it worked because I've been in the completed building, and Stefan, before his work with the WELS, was a concrete engineer in Germany, and he said, this is good rebar, and they poured it well. He was really happy as a German can be, about the progress of that building. And that was over the chapel area. And then, just most recent visit in January, they had finished the building. And Bonkeo and I are receiving some kind of document that we hope really has standing that says we own this thing. But it's a communist country, so you never own anything. You lease it from the government, and who knows what happens after that. But we did tour it, and there's a group of us in the worship area, the gathering area on the top floor of a 3-4 floor building. And this will house the students. It will have dormitory space. It has showers and bathrooms and kitchen area and classrooms. So right now, as I mentioned, we've done all our teaching online on Zoom, but the plan is to use this. And in January, we verified that it was done, it was complete, and we should just move in and start using it. But we don't have permission yet to use it. And we don't even know when that'll happen. So a week from now, I'm going back, and we're gonna have some meetings with the government, and we hope that those meetings result in permission to use the building we have built. Otherwise, it's there, and we can't do anything with it. And I won't go into the whole complicated story. It is a complicated story, but it's built, but we can't use it. So pray that maybe we can use the building that we built. We also need this, and I don't have this yet. I'm going on a tourist visa. I need a religious worker visa that would allow me to enter the country and live there for a significant amount of time instead of a 30-day single entry tourist visa that I have to leave within 30 days or I'll be in trouble. That's unresolved too. That's part of the reason that our family doesn't live there yet. Bonkeo Lord doesn't live there yet. We gotta have these things resolved. So all our training, and aren't you sick of the Zoom screen? I sure am. But you know, on the other hand, that's working. And in a way, the students like it because they can attend a class. It's usually a 2-hour session in the morning and a 3-hour one in the afternoon. And they all work on subsistent farms. So in between classes, they can go work on the farm. They're at home, they're on their phone, connected to the cell phone tower. And even if we cannot use this building, which we spent millions constructing, we're doing the Lord's work, and it will continue. And on that end, there's no restrictions. I can teach whenever and whatever I want on these online classes. I just can't do it inside a building in Hanoi for some reason. So we'll see how that turns out, but we're very thankful that we can do that. They're very celebratory. This was actually a couple years ago. They just wanted to have an 8-year celebration. Just, I don't know, is that a significant number in their culture? I'm not sure. And the gospel does go out. I mean, we're working with believers, but they're working with unbelievers. And in the upper left, you see a lady who's burning the family altar, that she came to know Jesus, and she no longer trusts in the shaman or the spiritism. And so it's a public testimony to her community. This has no power over me. Jesus will protect me. I'm going to burn it, and nothing bad will happen. And the gospel continues to spread. When we started with this group, they had 55,000 members. They now have 140,000. So it's just a great blessing to work with this. They're building their own churches. Part of the WELS Together, if you get that this week, is I wrote a page about this program where we wanted to get the training down to the congregational level. And that's a whole nother thing. It's not the seminary program. And we continue to write courses and teach these rural training courses. This is when they took the courses we taught and taught them to their leaders. That's when there's that suit that we had to wear. Back to Vietnam during COVID, still on Zoom. And one of my trips, finally with COVID restrictions lifted, I got up to the north to this beautiful place called Sapa. And this is one of our pastors on his farm where he's growing rice and corn. And their testimonies, they're always so thankful. I mean, every time we meet, they'll tell me, please tell the people of the WELS, we are so thankful that you brought this training to us. We're just grateful to have this training in the grace of God. And even if it ended today, it's already done great things to help these people. I don't think they'll ever go back to the legalism they had before, because they've tasted the glorious grace of God. And the final thing is, the sound's not coming through, but just this is what it looks like in Hanoi. This was last year. During rush hour, the motorbikes go up on the sidewalk, so you have to dodge them. And to cross the street there is, I do avoid cars and trucks, but when there's motorcycles, it's just a constant river, and you just step out and you just walk at a steady pace, and the motorbikes go around you. You have to kind of get used to that. But because they use motorbikes so much, I decided to fulfill a lifelong dream and get a motorcycle. It's a Suzuki Boulevard S50 2005 700cc, which is way more motorbike than I'll need over there. But I figure if I learn here and I get my endorsement, then I can go over there and navigate on a motorbike. That's my plan anyway. So I have just a few minutes to answer some questions. Or we just quit early. Yeah, Eric.
Just one thing you said, when you said that the men there like to laugh. That surprises me a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my brain, communist countries seem like gray, dark, no laughter. So that's interesting.
And it's more like that in Laos, but and I'm not saying it's all economics, it's partly cultural, but Vietnam is modernizing their economy. And did you read the news? Anthony Blinken is in Hanoi right now. They're building over a $1 billion embassy in Hanoi for the United States. In Hanoi, the capital of our former enemy. But you know, if we develop a good relationship with Vietnam, it's kind of a buffer against China. So relations are warming and have for some time between the United States and Vietnam. And people ask me, well, you know, they see you're an American, do they persecute you? No, no. You know, the generation of soldiers, they're much older anyway. And the younger generation, they know what happened, the war happened, but they're not thinking about it. They're thinking about the future, and they're very friendly. It's a very friendly country, and they do have a lot of tourists there. So there is an economic reason for joy, but also spiritually for the Hmong we work with, and then just generally culturally, they're kind of a happy people. Yeah.
Why would they approve WELS religious building in their mission?
Isn't that a mystery? I don't know. Why would they approve that? Because communism is officially atheistic, and you should have no religion. And they favored us with this special permission to build this center. I could speculate on reasons, but ultimately, I don't know. Yeah, it goes contrary to everything you'd think. Because, you know, by contrast, in other places we worked in Asia, we had to exit the country. Yeah, Dan.
To follow up that, are there other denominations or religions that are permitted there? I mean, does the Catholic Church have a foothold in the country?
Yeah, and especially Christian Missionary Alliance has had decades of work in Asia, and they have a heavy presence. And the Catholic Church has a heavy presence in Vietnam, going back to French Indochina, when they brought all the priests in, and there's Catholicism all over the place. Baptists are there, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, sadly, they have also come in. Some illegally, you know, they don't have permission, but they found a way in, and they're spreading their false ideas. You know, there's two ways to do it in a country like that. You can do it underground, or you can try to do it legally. And the way ours developed, it's a legal effort with government approval. Maybe that was the wrong decision, but that's the direction we went, and we're pursuing it to see, you know, how far it goes. Yeah. And traditionally, Vietnamese are Buddhists, so there's still a heavy influence of Buddhism in the country. Yeah, Steph. Yes. In fact, all the students we work with have family farms, and some of them will have to move to Hanoi, or already have, and then other people in the family will have to maintain their fields, because that's just a very important part of how they eat and culturally and all their celebrations. So yeah, some are going to college now and they're getting jobs as engineers and other things, but the generation we're working with, they're still all farmers. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share that message, and God bless you, and I ask your prayers for this mission. Thank you.